celebratory treat this morning. Dr. Lew Smith, in World War II, flew the famous Boeing B-17 heavy bomber. He was in the European theater and has, I believe it's 35 missions. And he's going to be talking about that, his experiences this morning. It's time now to hear from our guest speaker, Dr. Lew Smith, and I'll let him go ahead and get into his presentation here this morning. Dr. Lew Smith.
By the way, Lew's memories. I'm one of those guys that's seen it all, did it all, but can't remember most of it. Today I'm the one that starts the ball rolling. I'm excited and delighted to be here, and I want to thank you for your kind applause, which I so richly deserve, but seldom receive. You know, after that introduction that Hurt gave me, I can't hardly wait to hear what I'm going to say. I'm here to talk a little bit about flying a B-17 Flying Fortress 4-engine bomber out of England over Germany 35 times with the mighty 8th Air Force. I assume you're here to listen. However, if you should finish listening before I finish talking, hey, hold up your hand. We'll do something else. Listen, on a brief personal note, I'm a native Wichitan, and when I was going to Wichita North High back in 1941, you all remember 1941, don't you? One or two, good. Yeah. One of my best buddies was a young fellow by the name of Tommy McConnell. He had two older brothers. And when the war started, they all three went down and enlisted in the Army Air Corps, went through flight training, learned how to fly B-24 bombers. B-24, by the way, was this one with the twin tails. Pretty good bomber, but not near as good as the B-17, of course. Anyway, they learned to fly those bombers, and they were sent to the Pacific to fight the war. Tommy, my buddy, lost his life on his 4th mission, and the older brother, Fred, also lost his life during the war. So we honored their memory with McConnell Air Force Base. And by the way, speaking of B-24 bombers, there was a plant in Detroit, Michigan that manufactured these bombers, and the thing was a half a mile long and a quarter mile wide. That half a mile means about 9 football fields, if you can imagine it. By the end of the war, they were putting out one B-24 4-engine bomber every hour, 24 hours a day. Made over 18,000 of them. Of course, there was always competition between the B-17 pilots and B-24 pilots. This plant outside of Detroit was called the Willow Run Plant. We B-17 pilots, we always called it the Willow Run Plant. But, and also we'd always say, well, the B-24 is just a box that the B-17 came in. So we tease each other quite a bit. By the way, when I was going to North, there was a young fellow that was one class ahead of me. His name was Jimmy Jabera. Is that familiar to anybody? Aha. He was a really interesting guy, about 5'6" tall, and in bombastic, loved to talk. He'd throw his arms around. I tried to get him talking every time I see him. Anyway, he also joined the Air Force right after the war started. He learned to fly pursuit planes, P-51s, was sent to England, and was credited with shooting down 2 German airplanes. Now, Jimmy stayed in the service after the war, and when the Korean War came along, he was flying jets. And Jimmy Jabera became America's first jet ace. He shot down 15 MiG-15s. In fact, before the Korean War was over, he was a triple ace, full colonel, and the word was out that most likely he was going to be the youngest general in the Air Force. Unfortunately, he lost his life in an automobile accident. And of course, we honor his memory with Jabera Airport in Wichita. Well,
when the war started, I went down and enlisted right away. And they said, they would put you through a bunch of tests, of course. And they said, well, yeah, we want you, but I was 17. He said, you're too young. So they sent me home for a year. And I went to Friends University to work on my pre-optometry and also worked second shift out of Beach. And sure enough, though, when I turned 18, they invited me into the service. Went in, went through flight training, learned how to fly B-17s. And then they sent me up to North Dakota to put our crew together. We had 3 months training to get used to each other. The B-17 had a 10-man crew. Then they sent us to Omaha, Nebraska, picked up a brand new B-17 right off the line, and they said, here, fly it to England, it's that away. So we did that. By the way, they said, sign this requisition here. If you break it, you buy it. It was for $300,000. Anyway, we did fly over there, went to England, and ended up in the 385th Bomb Group, from which I flew 35 missions over Germany. By the way, if you're interested, there's some pictures up here of the McConnell brothers, and also one of Jimmy Jabera. In the service, they called Jimmy the cigar kid, because he's always smoking a cigar. If you look at his left hand here, you can see a little cigar there he's working on. Get back to the war. John Keegan, the British historian, said that World War II was the single largest incident in the history of mankind. It was fought on 6 of the 7 continents, all of the seas, in the air, and before it was over, more than 50 million people died. 50 million, can you imagine that? Yeah, over in England, there was an area about the size of Colorado. In this area, there were 700 airfields and 10,000 airplanes. So traffic was a tremendous problem. There was too many mid-air collisions. In this area, we had 40 bomb groups and 15 fighter groups. Each bomb group had 4 squadrons. Each squadron had 18 planes, 24 crews. Most of the missions I flew on, there were at least 12 to 1,500 bombers in the air at the same time. Early in the war, the English had tried daylight bombing, and their losses were so atrocious that they discontinued that, and they bombed only at night. Well, at night, of course, you can find the city, maybe a section of the city, but there wouldn't be anything such as pinpoint bombing. Well, we smart Yanks, we thought, well, we've got the northern bomb site, we're going to do it in the daytime, and we're going to hit railroad marshalling yards and oil plays and factories and things like that. And this is the way we started out. The brass figured that if they keep the losses to 10%, they could easily replace that 10% and build a force rather rapidly. Well, unfortunately, our losses were much worse than that, particularly the first year and a half of the war. In 1943, in October, we lost in 1 week, from 8th to the 14th, we lost 162 bombers. And that was much more than 10%, more like 20%. So they actually discontinued bombing for a couple of weeks to decide what to do, because they simply couldn't keep up with these losses. And they did 2 things. They changed the formation, but the major thing they did, somebody finally come up with the idea of putting extra tanks, drop tanks, on our fighters. Up to that time, our fighter protection could only go part way to the target with us. They just didn't have the range of the bombers. And as a result, of course, the Germans just simply wait till the fighters left, and then they'd go after us. Well, they put drop tanks on the fighters, and fortunately then the loss rate dropped, our losses dropped considerably, so it wasn't so bad. In our particular group, the average life of B-17 was 4 months and 12 days, and the average life of the crew was 15 missions. Often people will ask me, well, what was it like when you were flying a bomber back then? I like to tell them, you may imagine you're 5 miles up in the air. You're in an aluminum tube that has a 8-foot diameter, and you can take a screwdriver about like that and punch a hole in that aluminum. Now up there, this is an unpressurized airplane, and the temperature was about -45 to -55 degrees centigrade. So it was a little chilly. So we had to wear long johns, electric suit, flight jacket, flak jacket, throat mic, oxygen mask, earphones. Over the target, we usually put a helmet on. And also, of course, in our wings were 2,800 gallons of 100-octane high-test aviation gas, and the bomb bay was 6,000 pounds of high explosive. And unfortunately, these unfriendly people on the ground were shooting these 88 millimeter and 105 millimeter cannons at them. Those shells would burst around like this. And nasty little airplanes, German airplanes, would fly through our formation shooting machine gun bullets and air-to-air rockets. Nothing to it, piece of cake. Okay, got to get to some airplane stories. There are so many that it's hard to choose. I'm kind of like a mosquito in the nudist colony. I don't know where to begin. You know, I used to think I was indecisive. Now I'm not so sure. By the way, the other day I decided to procrastinate. Never got around to it. Okay, I want to tell you an air story about the last big battle of the war. It was called the Battle of the Bulge. Anybody know about that? Have you heard about the Battle of the Bulge? A few people have. Okay. It was in December of 1944. Worst winter they'd had over there. Ice, cold, snow, really horrible. At that time, the Western Front was just a little ways outside of Germany. We had 4 divisions up there. And some of them were inexperienced people, and all they were trying to do is dig in and keep warm and keep from frozen to death because they knew there wouldn't be any action until spring. Well, the Germans were losing the war, and they knew that they were, so they had to do something drastic. So Hitler managed to collect 20 divisions along a 60-mile front of Germany with Luxembourg and Belgium. Their plan was to a surprise attack to drive through Belgium to the point of Antwerp, where they could again get supplies and maybe be able to continue the war. Well, on the 16th, of course, they waited until a severe Arctic front was coming down, so they knew that our Air Force would have a problem. On the 16th of December, they came across, and they just decimated our four division, just slaughtered them. It was awful. At first, the brass thought, well, it's just a probe. They'll go 2 or 3 miles and then pull back. But the first day, they were about 10 miles. Second day, they were going to get 15 miles, close to a little town called Bastogne. And so, of course, they called all the generals, say, we got to get some help out there. We got to get some reinforcement. And the only one that said they could was, you could probably guess who, General Patton. And, you know, he's my favorite general. His motto was haul ass and bypass, and boy, that's what he did. Anyway, he said he could get some people up there, and of course they said, call out the Air Force. So on the 19th of December, they got us up at 3 o'clock, we briefed, and went out at the airplane at 5 and set for 5 hours, hoping the weather would break, but it was just awful, so they had to scrub the mission. That was the 19th. 20th and 21st, same thing, got up 5 hours in the airplane, scrubbed the mission. 22nd and 23rd, weather was so bad, just solid from 30,000 feet right down to the ground, didn't even get us out of bed. But finally, December the 24th, the day before Christmas, the weather finally broke. And the greatest air armada the world has ever seen, and probably ever will see, took off. There were 2,034 heavy bombers, that's B-17s, B-24s, 936 fighters. The bomber stream was over 300 miles long, took 2 hours to pass one point in the ground. General Castle was leading the 8th Air Force that day. He was in the first group of 36 bombers. Our group was the second group of 36 bombers in the bomber stream. Well, as we approached Germany, we saw about 45 German hot fighters hit that first group. And in these 45 fighters, there were about 10 MiG-262s, which was the German jet. They had an operational jet, but we didn't have one yet. It was a real problem to us because it was 75 miles faster than anything we had, and it was armed with 4 30-millimeter cannons in its nose. So it was really a problem. I've never seen one of them hit a formation, a B-17 formation, without taking at least one B-17 down. Well, these 45 planes hit that first group, and in about 5 minutes, 8 B-17s either exploded or went down in flames. Of course, they always try to get the leader, and they knocked 2 engines out of Castle's plane. And of course, with 2 engines, you can't stay up with a formation, so he fell out of formation. The minute you fall out of formation, the fighters are all over you, of course. Well, he did manage to level off at about 10,000 feet. We were up at 25,000. And he leveled off 10,000, and 4 guys got out before the plane exploded. Well, as you can imagine, we were a little nervous because we were the second group. And we thought, we're next. Well, unfortunately, they went for us. They went back to the third group, worked on them for about 5 minutes, took down 4 B-17s there. Then they did come after us. And 2 fortunate things happened. Number 1, the jets couldn't stay up in the air very long, so they were having to return to refuel. And secondly, finally, our protection, our P-51s, the P-47, and P-38s finally arrived. And man, it was a real wingding. I mean, there were fights all over the sky. Everywhere you looked, there were dogfights. Germans chasing Americans, Americans chasing Germans, fighter planes exploding, parachutes opening, B-17s going down, just like in the movies. I mean, it was really wild. We had 3 Messerschmitts came right through our formation, and 4 P-51 American fighters were on their tail. Got up about 11 o'clock. One of the Messerschmitts exploded, so we were flying through airplane parts. It hit some of our planes, but it didn't take any of them down. I looked up ahead, and I saw an American fighter and a German fighter collide. Both pilots jumped out. Both of their chutes opened as they were going down. Another German came along, a Messerschmitt, and machine gunned the American in his parachute. This usually didn't happen. That's the only time I really saw it. Well, as you can imagine, with 2,000 bombers in the air, we did some bombing. We hit some targets, and of course, with 936 fighters, they went after. By the way, of these 20 divisions, the German 9 divisions were tanks. They were Panzer tanks. And the Panzer tank, unfortunately, was better than any tank that we had. But anyway, the fighter planes went after the tanks and anything that moved on the road. and began to blunt the drive finally. And then on the 26th of December, Patton had pulled 2 corps of his Third Army up in a forced march of 100 miles. And at 4:45 in the afternoon, he relieved the battered bastards of Bastogne, which was the beginning of the end of the drive. Our losses in this particular battle were heavier than any other. We lost over 80,000 men, either killed, captured, or frozen to death. We lost that day. We lost 38 bombers and 50 fighters, and the Germans lost 76 airplanes. So it was a real big deal. You know, well, my mind works like lightning. When brain flash, it's gone. And my memory's not as good as it used to be, and also my memory's not as good as it used to be. And I was confused as a little boy dropped his gum in the hen house. Okay, I want to tell you a story about my tail gunner. Tail gunners were an important part of the team. Our tail gunner's name was Howard Howdershell. He was from Maryland, and a little bit wet behind the ears, a little bit backwoodsy, so the guys teased him quite a bit. But he took it real well and came back at him, and he did his job, and everybody liked him. On November the 4th, 1944, we were going to bomb the oil refinery at Hamburg. And the air was just as bumpy as all could be. We always flew and bombed in formation, of course, just for protection, because we had 13 50 caliber machine guns on each B-17, and you put 36 of those together, well, you got a whole bunch of guns. So we flew in formation and bombed formation. Well, we were trying to fly in formation, and of course, we were just bouncing up and down. And of course, when that happens, the formation spreads out a little bit. It's not near so tight. Ordinarily, you'd fly maybe 40 foot from the other plane. But it'll spread out to 50 foot when that happened. We were bouncing around. All of a sudden, we hit a downdraft and dropped about 30 foot. Everything in the airplane that wasn't tied down hit the ceiling and then came back down. Well, we have these big ammunition cases that hold 600 rounds of 50 caliber machine gun bullets. And if one hit you, it could really do some damage. So immediately I clicked on my interphone and said, pilot to crew, everybody check in, please. Everybody all right? And one by one, everybody checked in except the tail gunner. So I clicked on again. I said, howdy. We called him howdy. Everything okay back there? And then there's silence. Pretty soon his intercom clicked on, and his voice was kind of shaky. He says, Skipper, he says, I've got a little problem. He says, it's kind of embarrassing. He said, when we hit that last bump, I was using a relief tube. Now, the relief tube back then was a funnel attached to a hose that went out the bottom of the airplane. I was using the relief tube, and now an extremely portion of my anatomy is stuck to the gun barrel. Well, here we were, 25,000 feet over Germany. Temperature was minus 50 degrees, and anything damp would stick to that ice-cold metal with a death-like grip. So you of course can imagine what came over the intercom then, all kinds of whimsical remarks and rude comments and uncredible suggestions. So I said, calm down, guys, calm down. I said, we've got a problem here. I said, howdy, you're going to have to warm that barrel up. You're going to have to shoot off a few rounds. Skipper, he said, the recoil on those on the twin 50s. I said, no, howdy, but otherwise you're going to be stuck for the duration. Not only that, you're going to be quick frozen. And I said, by the way, when you do this, the rest of the formation would appreciate it if you didn't shoot any of them down. Well, I heard it grumbling on and pretty soon the back end shook a little bit as he shot off his twin 50s. And then it was quite the funny thing is when he did that, 36 planes in that squadron, every turret in that squadron started spinning around looking for the enemy airplanes he was shooting at, which weren't there, of course. Anyway, it was quiet, so I clicked the intercom and said, howdy, you okay? Pretty soon it clicked it on. First there was an oath, and then a sigh. And he said, Skipper, he says, mission accomplished. Me and my manhood are again one. Bloody, but unbowed. Well, I said, thank goodness, howdy. Listen, now, we've got some sulfur drug in the medical kit. That was before penicillin, of course. We've got some sulfur drug. I'll send Tom back. Skipper, not on your life. Some things are sacred. Okay, howdy. I said, that's fine. So we went ahead, dropped our bombs on Hamburg, took our lumps, got our holes in the airplane and so on. Got back home, we thought, well, we'll give Hattie the full treatment. Anytime you have wounded aboard, you shoot a red flare, and you get priority landing. So we shot the red flare, come right on the runway, pulled off to the side. The minute we stopped, the two waist gunners jumped out real fast and made it like they were helping Hattie out of the tail. and made him, of course, the medical, the ambulance there, the meat wagon was there, and they made him lay down on the train, and the medics were looking at him scratching their head because they couldn't see any blood, and he wouldn't tell them where he was hurt. Anyway, he went to the hospital, was there 2 or 3 days, and he rejoined the crew and finished his missions. However, he refused to sign an application for a Purple Heart because he was afraid somebody would ask him how. Okay, let me tell you another quick one on this is on a tail gunner too, but I think it's kind of interesting. In March the 1st, 1945, we were going to Ulm, Germany, to bomb a tank factory. And I was what you call a flight commander. That meant I led a section of 6 B-17s, or a squadron of 12. And when you lead like that, you always keep your top turret gunner, who's the engineer, keep him in the top turret to watch the other planes in the formation to make sure they're not having any problems. So our engineer, Jim, was up there in the top turret, and we've just crossed the channel. We're just barely over Belgium, and all of a sudden he said, "Look up, look up." Well, we were in the low squadron of 12 planes, and there's a lead squadron and a high squadron of 12 planes. We looked up at the high squadron. In the high squadron, we were going through the tops of some clouds, and for some reason, one plane pulled up rapidly into another one, cut the tail and a good portion of the airplane off, and of course they were both going down. Airplane pieces were flying everywhere. The tail gunner in that top plane, his name was Joe Jones, and he knew that something had happened because he felt the crash, of course, but he didn't know what it was. Of course, first we weren't having any enemy action, so he assumed it had to be an mid-air collision. So he looked up toward it. Well, first he pushed on his intercom, said, tell the pilot. Of course, there wasn't any answer. Looked up front. All he could see was the jumble of metal. There's a little escape door up there. He pulled himself up to it and tried to get it open, but it was just unmercifully jammed. He couldn't even kick it loose. So he crawled back to his pad, sat down there in the tail, lit a cigarette, and remembered that his mother had told him, "Join the Navy because you can swim, but you can't fly." Well, Joe rode that tail down. We were from about 13,000 feet at the time. He rode the tail down, and the tail surface is so big on a B-17, it didn't go straight down. It kind of fluttered down a little bit, and he lit in a plowed field. The farmer came running out, and he saw somebody was in the tail. Had to go back to the farmhouse to get an axe to literally chop him out of the tail. They got him to a British hospital there in Belgium. And in about 4 or 5 days, he woke up. He was unconscious for a while. And believe it or not, he didn't have a broken bone. Of course, he had a concussion and bruises everywhere and bag cut on his tongue and so on. But he recovered, and in a couple of weeks, he was back home to our base again. Of course, they told him, "Your war's over. You're going home now." In 1992, we had a reunion in Tulsa. Our group had a reunion in Tulsa, and I saw Joe Jones there. And we had a good talk about it. Since then, he's passed away. That day, both of the officers in both of those crews, all 8 of them, were from our barracks. So it was a pretty sad day because we lost a lot of people that day. One of my best friends was a co-pilot of that crew, and he happened to be sick that day. He had a sinus infection. You just can't fly with that, so he wasn't on the trip. So he lived for another day. By the way, Joe Jones was the name of that gunner, and he was in Ripley, believe it or not, his story is. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about the home front. You know, the war stories are fighting men are legion, but without the tremendous effort of literally every American, we could not have won the war. It was a different war. Everyone was involved. If you didn't have somebody in the service, at least you're working defense. So it was entirely different than the wars we have nowadays. Now, immediately after Pearl Harbor, we were concerned because we really thought we were probably going to be invaded, particularly from the Japanese, because they had taken over all of the Pacific except Australia. Of course, the Germans had taken all of Europe except England. We weren't too concerned about the Germans, but we really thought probably Japan would be invading the West Coast rather soon. So immediately we blacked out both coasts. Every house had to have black curtains, black to seal the light at night. Every automobile that was out at night, the top half of the headlight had to be painted black so it would just shine down. No street lights were allowed, and Of course, guards were placed on bridges and tunnels and factories and waterfronts. Anti-aircraft guns were placed on the top of buildings. We were concerned. We were actually pretty shaken. We were totally unprepared for the war. Lockheed had a big airplane factory in Los Angeles, and they literally built a mock city on the roof of that factory. They had streets, trees, houses, and everything. And from the air, it looked exactly like a city. I've got a picture of it here somewhere if you'd like to come up and see it later. Also, on the night of December the 2nd, which was Pearl Harbor Day, of course, Frisco received 4 false air raid alarms. Oakland, California closed the schools for the next day. Eleanor Roosevelt, the wife of the president, immediately dashed off a letter to her daughter and grandkids who lived in California, telling them, move back from the coast, we're probably going to be invaded. A butler in the White House overheard President Roosevelt strategizing that if the Japs invaded and got as far east as Chicago, what he would do. The rumors, of course, were wild. Kansas City had been attacked. Frisco had been bombed. Panama Canal had been captured by the Japanese. All these things were going around. During the war, we built 3,000 small, what we call Liberty ships. They were 440 feet long, 10,000 tons, to transfer materials and troops. And of these 3,700 of them were sunk during the war. 80 of them right off the coast of Cape Hatteras. Cape Hatteras, you know, is right off the Carolinas, and the people that lived there often at night could look out over the ocean and see one or maybe 2 fires where German submarines had torpedoed some of our ships. Oh, by the way, pause for a minute and remember, this was 69 years ago, and this is before we had frozen food or antibiotics, didn't have credit cards or ballpoint pens, no computers, no drip dry clothes or pantyhose, no ice makers, no clothes dryers, no freezers, no dishwashers. Can you imagine that? They didn't have any pizza or air conditioning. The only thing was air conditioning was the movie. If you wanted to get cool, you had to buy a ticket and go to the movie. No Cheerios, instant coffee hadn't been invented. McDonald's did not exist. Alaska and Hawaii were not states. Coke was something you drank, grass was something you mowed, and a pot was something you cooked in. There were 5 and 10 cent stores where you could literally buy something for 5 or 10 cents. And for a nickel, you could buy a Coke, make a phone call, or mail a letter with 2 postcards. A Chevrolet the new ones cost $650, and gasoline was 10 cents a gallon. Of course, sacrifices were made at home too. Many of the products and food items were short of supply because everything was going to the troops. And so they rationed things, and you had to have a ration staff to buy things. And some of the main things they rationed were butter and flour, gas, sugar, shoes, nylon, meat, tires. You know, that's when they invented the retread. They'd take the base of the old tire and put a new tread on it so they could use it longer. Hems on ladies' skirts were discontinued. The cuffs on men's pants were discontinued to save cloth, of course. Also, we recycled back then too. We recycled string, rubber bands, rags, tinfoil, paper, scrap metal. The slogan was "Use it up, wear it out, make it do, or do without." So gasoline and meat was the main thing that really hurt, because the average citizen only got just a few gallons a week unless you worked for a defense man or something. As far as meat goes, in a day and a half in Milwaukee, they sold 8,000 pounds of horse meat for human consumption. Now, also about that time too, women were just ecstatic over this new material called nylon. Oh, these nylon hose were wonderful. And all of a sudden it disappeared from the market because it went into airplane tires and ropes and tents and things like that. In just 4 years, the United States produced 300,000 airplanes. 300,000. We had 2,000 when the war started. Also, they produced 100,000 tanks, 71,000 naval vessels, 5,500 cargo vessels, 2.5 million trucks, and the thing that won the war, the Jeep, produced 600,000 of those. By the end of the war, we're putting out a Jeep every minute and a half. So, The hard work and long hours, of course, saved lives, and no one knew it any better than a sailor by the name of Elgin Staples. He was in the Pacific, and his ship was torpedoed by a Japanese submarine, and he was washed overboard, had his life jacket on. It saved him. Another one of our ships come along and picked him up. Later on, as he looked at and inspected his life jacket, he noticed that it had been stamped and inspected in his hometown of Akron, Ohio, by his mother. Only out of the diligence of the American worker was the U.S., the United States, able to outproduce and outgun Germany and Japan. Without the help at home, we never could have made it. Well, you know, I always feel like a meeting like this ought to end the same day it starts, so I better cut this off. There are a lot more stories I'd like to tell. I got a neat one about Kilroy, and you know the Kilroy. We'll tell that one later. You've been a great audience. Thank you for listening. If I said anything I'm sorry for, I'm glad I did. Listen, I want to end on a little lighter note on my favorite romantic poem, and it goes like this. Last night I held a lovely hand, a hand so soft and neat, I thought my heart would burst with joy, so wildly did it beat. No other hand into my heart could such great solace bring as that dear hand I held last night. 4 aces and a king. Mark Twain once said, a wise man never misses a good chance to shut up. This is mine.
Thank you for watching this presentation at the Life Enrichment meeting at Butler Community College. Our speaker was Dr. Lew Smith, a World War II B-17 bomber pilot for the 8th Air Force. This has been a presentation of BCTV 20, Butler Community College.